Now that John is here, we can do it. Everyone, let's go ahead and start. I know Councilor Galvin is going to be coming shortly, but we will call our meeting to order. And we'll run around quickly and introduce ourselves to our audience here, just in case people don't know, and then we'll go on. Very good. Why don't you begin, Stacey, please?
Okay, I'm Stacey Laundrie. I'm the Assistant District Administrator for Business and Programming for VDOT and Culpeper District.
John Jones, Transit Director, City of Charlottesville.
Karen Davis with John.
Mike Signer, Charlottesville City Council.
Ned Galloway, County Board of Supervisors.
Jacob Zumfeldy, staff here at the MPO.
Wood Hudson, staff here at the MPO. Chip Boyles, also staff with the MPO and Planning District Commission.
John Lynch, VDOT Culpeper District Engineer.
Ann Malik, Elmore County Board of Supervisors and current chair.
Chuck Proctor, Culpeper District Planning Manager.
Wonderful. I'll have you all do that too, just for fun. Go ahead, Morgan.
Hey, good morning, welcome with the Southern Environmental Law Center.
Great.
Kevin McDermott, Transportation Planner, Albemarle County.
Tony Edwards, City of Charlottesville.
Tiffany Divinsky with DOT.
Julian Snyder, Planning Intern with
Wonderful.
TDC.
Thank you. And Chris Kelly, taking it on. Very good. Okay, thank you, everybody. First on our agenda is matters from the public. Is there anyone gathered before us who would like to address us about anything this morning or this afternoon? Please. We have a special chair, a hot seat for the speaker right here, so come and sit next to Chip. That way you can be properly recorded and whatever. And on camera, I guess.
Yeah, I will remind everybody we are live streaming as we have been and keeping these on our website.
Wonderful, thank you.
Great, well good afternoon everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Morgan Butler. I'm with the Southern Environmental Law Center. There were two items on your agenda today I'd like to speak to, and I'll try to be very quick. The first one is the long-range transportation plan updates. I kind of wish Ms. Galvin were here to hear this because this is a pretty wonky point, and I think she would get it. I know some of the folks in this room will get it, but others may not quite understand. But looking at attachment C and attachment D in the staff report for the long-range transportation plan item today, attachment C is a list of the measures that will be used to gauge sort of the effectiveness of these overall scenarios of projects that are being evaluated. And then attachment D is a list of measures that will be used to evaluate individual projects. And I just wanted to point out that on both of those, for congestion, in terms of measuring these scenarios or measuring these individual projects in terms of how well they alleviate congestion, both seem to be using roadway level of service and vehicle hours of delay. And we just wanted to point out that both of those measures have been the subject of pretty significant pushback in recent years because they focus so heavily on moving cars and on moving cars quickly. And so this often leads to widened streets or added lanes, removal of on-street parking, limiting crosswalks, and related types of issues. These are all perfectly appropriate if you're talking about an interstate highway or a freeway, but when we're talking about the streets in the county's urban areas or in the city, where there's a much greater focus on multimodal transportation, on complete and safer streets, these are not necessarily the results you want to be pushing. So we're a bit concerned that the measures that are being proposed to evaluate congestion could actually undercut key transportation goals in the city and the county and the metropolitan planning area. So as for what measures to use to evaluate congestion, I think it may be instructive to look at the factors that SmartScale uses for this congestion category. And notably, rather than use level of service, SmartScale uses person throughput, which includes other modes of travel and not just vehicles. Similarly, rather than use vehicle hours of delay, as is proposed for the long-range transportation plan, SmartScale uses person hours of delay, which is again a broader measure that captures all modes of travel. So we think it's worth considering both of those measures or similar ones in the factors that will be used in the long-range transportation plan to gauge congestion. If not to replace the congestion factors that you all have in there, then at least to supplement them. That's the first topic. The second one I will be much briefer. It relates to the resolution for SmartScale projects to submit. I've spoken before both the City Council and the Board of Supervisors in support of the package of projects at Hydraulic and Route 29. I won't bore you all by repeating those comments tonight, but just wanted to say that Southern Environmental Law Center, we were a member of the panel that helped develop the projects. We're strongly in favor of them, and we urge the MPO to include those projects as smart scale applications so that the community can continue the significant progress that's been made in improving Route 29 over the past few years. Thank you so much for the chance to speak.
Thank you very much. Stick around, we may have a question for you later. Great. Is there anyone else who would like to address us now? All right, then we will move on from that part of our agenda. And are there any responses or answers to any of our questions that we've heard so far? We will come back to the discussion about the criteria shortly. So let's hold on to that thought. Let's move on to review and acceptance of the agenda. Are there changes or additions for the agenda?
We do have one item that we just received some email from yesterday with additional information. This has been discussed with the MPO many months ago regarding a request to the city of Charlottesville for a transfer of right-of-way of Holiday Drive to an adjoining property owner. And the city of Charlottesville has asked the MPO's opinion or recommendation or non-recommendation on how this would affect any longer-term transportation projects, and in particular, the work around Hydraulic and Hillsdale Extension. So we put at your desk that email from yesterday and some backup supporting documents. It's something that you may want to begin considering today of what or any action you may want to take, and have that at your next meeting, or if you were so inclined to add it to the agenda for a decision today, you could do that as well. And so it would be our recommendation to just have it under staff reports. I could go into more detail, and then it would be something that if you wanted to, we could add it to the agenda for the next meeting.
Very good. We will put it there.
Okay.
It'll be 8C and then better there than 10. All right, very good. Thank you then. That change, we will go ahead and accept our agenda for that. Moving on to approval of the meeting minutes for March 28th. Were there any changes or corrections that people would like to give us for the minutes or a motion?
I think there was a change that was made after they were sent electronically, but before today, so.
Okay, so that's been taken care of.
believe
Thank
so,
you, Becca.
yes.
That's great. And Becca White came in after we introduced her, so there she is. Thank you very much. Transportation. Very good. Do we have a motion on the minutes?
Motion.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of adoption as corrected?
Aye.
Aye, thank you very much. Any opposed? All right, we have approved our minutes. Let us now move on to the public hearing for fiscal year 19 UPWP with Wood Hudson.
Sure.
Will help us out.
This is a public hearing item. The Unified Planning Work Program is an annual document that is a requirement of FHWA guidance for MPOs. It essentially is the document that lays out our work program for the next year, identifying the priorities that we're going to be focusing on. We brought this document before you at our last meeting. There haven't been any changes since then. I'm going to jump to kind of the highlights for FY19, which is mainly the long-range transportation plan, working on the Jefferson Area Bike and Pedestrian Plan, which is both an urban and rural project, and then continuation of all the work on the regional transit partnership.
That ought to keep you busy.
It will keep us busy. And in addition, there's all the MPO administration tasks relating to things like the TIP amendments and modifications that occur, and short-range planning, which is things related to smart-scale application development, TAP grants, or other things that we work on that are more short-range in nature. A lot of that is in coordination with DRBT and VDOT.
And would the long-range transportation plan is due to be completed in May of 19.
Correct.
And you have blocked out, working back from that, you've blocked out
Yes.
steps all the way along the line. So what's the next step that comes up?
We'll
Today, got it. Okay.
we have a
Jumping ahead.
timeline.
That's right, we have a timeline coming. All right, thank you. Any other questions for staff on this, or then we'll open the public hearing?
Just a clarification on the two tables for the FY19 work program. The first one summarizing FY18, but then it totals up and it says FY17 total work program. And I believe the second table, that's the proposed FY19.
Yes, I thought we had taken care of that. I'll make sure that.
Chuck assured me it would have been, I brought it up last time, but
Yeah, I thought I'd gotten that. I apologize. That will be modified. I'll just modify those table titles. Yeah. No.
and then there's a FY17 VPWP activities by task.
Oh, is that in the?
It's on page, that was on page 10.
10. Yep. Those can be changed. Make sure that those changed. Yeah, it should be 18 and 19, yeah. Alright. Thank you.
Any other corrections that need to be made before we do the public hearing? All right, then we will open the public hearing. Is there anyone in our audience who would like to address us on this public hearing for the UPWP, the work program for our next year? I do not see a stampede, so we will close the public hearing. Are there more questions, discussion, or motion for approval on this item?
Motion for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries as well. Thank you, Wood. We will now move on to the Smart Scale project list, which says MPO staff, we're all hands on deck on that one. And resolutions of support for projects within the MPO area and resolution directing MPO staff to apply for Smart Scale projects on our behalf. Excellent.
So a little background, slightly different than the last round of Smart Scale. Eligible entities are now limited to 4 applications per eligible entity. With that in mind, we've worked with both Charlottesville and Albemarle to determine the distribution of applications and have assembled the resolutions based on that. So the first resolution is for projects within the MPO boundary being applied for by others. And I have both Tony and Kevin here today. So if there are specific questions about a project in a jurisdiction, I will call on them to answer any detailed questions that there might be.
So where it says localities on this, it means the county and the city and others, other jurisdictions. Got it, okay. Very good, so.
There's nothing more specific than the words that are in these resolution.
And just a reminder, the initial intent to apply is due June 1st. And the details for a lot of these projects will be ironed out prior to the application deadline of August 1st.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other than what we'll get to with hydraulic, of which there are plenty of details.
Okay.
Some of these projects are even still under study. We haven't even actually determined in some of the instances what the final alternatives can be for that location.
So what we're approving is the concept at a particular location,
At the look, there's
price
gonna be
designed to be
improvements,
determined.
at a particular location, improvements may change. But it will be, the location's not gonna change,
And the timeline for that determination will be sometime between now and August?
yes.
Very good.
The projects that were sort of on the preliminary list last meeting and now down to these 4 by jurisdiction, that means those other ones have dropped away and won't continue in this process for now. Or won't continue in this process for this cycle at all.
Are there any, would the policy board like me to go through the list, or would we just like to address if there's specific questions about a specific project?
Let's go through it, I think that would be the best.
Alright, so projects being submitted by Charlottesville include the US 250 bypass at Hydraulic Road, the 5th Street Extended Ridge Street and Cherry Avenue Elliott project, West Main streetscape, Preston Avenue at Grady Avenue intersection improvements. Any questions at that point?
Lots of good multimodal stuff
Yep,
going on there,
yep.
that's wonderful.
Being submitted by Albemarle, Route 20 and US 250 Richmond Road intersection improvements. Berkmar Drive to Airport Road connection. Route 20 South, Scottsville Road improvements in the vicinity of Route 53. Road East, Penn Park Road roundabout. And 2 projects being submitted by the Planning District Commission, but within the MPO area, are a Route 29 shared use path and the Barracks Road US 250-29 bypass westbound ramp right turn lane.
And that is a really, really important thing to have in there, that's great. I'm glad the commission was able to add that. Very good. Now, remind me, are we public hearing on each of these, or this is at our level now? It doesn't say public hearing on the agenda, so I just wanna make sure I'm doing this right. Okay, just our discussion and going forward.
It's discussion and then
All right, questions or concerns about this one before we let Wood go on to the next one? I think that would be the best way to go on.
Just on the third one for Albemarle County, are there intersection improvements at that location, or it looks like it's more extension of turn lanes?
That's one of the, Kevin and I.
Yeah, I'll speak briefly on that. So what you see here are specific things that we wanted VDOT's planning consultants to look at to try and improve operations both at the intersection and as you're coming into it from either sides. As Chuck pointed out, I think that for now, because we are still evaluating this, the best thing to do is to maybe not look at all these specific improvements this time, but just say that we're trying to improve operations and safety in the intersection and intersection approaches. We're looking at different alternatives for how that can be done right now.
So this will be a case where between now and August 1st, one of these will come out as the best choice. Or something, not
yeah,
necessarily one of these.
exactly.
We're
Some sort of
looking at-
improvement.
I mean, we looked at a couple of different alternatives, intersection improvements, we looked at a roundabout, we looked at an arc cut, we looked at a couple of different scenarios for this location. And it's just figuring out which one do we want to move forward in the application, is what we're trying to do.
But it's mostly south of PVCC that we're looking at, which is the stream on one side and mountain on the other, which does.
Well, it's
the reason why nothing's
intersection.
happened for 20 years.
It's the intersection itself, and that's
All right. Whatever you've done in the last couple of years has really helped some, so that's, I can't remember exactly how it is, but there are different lanes than there used to be.
They changed the
It's
striping.
been very helpful. All right, good. Any other questions or discussion on these? Thank you, Ken. Don't go away. All right, let's go on then to, well, I guess we should have a vote and a motion on that individual one. Should we do it that way? Is that what you prefer? All right. Do we have a motion? Oh, hello, Heidi. Sorry, I was double booked. All right. We're on page 8 of this when we get there. Do we have a motion on projects funded by others for this? Going forward.
So moved.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I'm trying to get caught up in doing our resolutions of support under number 5, no 6.
Great. Oh, good. Just in
Done.
time.
That's right. All right, so we have a motion and a second, and all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, that one has been adopted, so support. Next on our list. Good, just in time.
All right, this is another staff item, so the next resolution on the list is for the intent to apply for projects for the MPO. So these are representing 4 slots available, the MPO to apply. There's 2 distinct projects, I guess. There's 3 slots for the hydraulic road 29 intersection improvement scope there. And then second one is Fontaine Avenue bypass interchange improvements. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually switch back to the PowerPoint and let Chip provide the overview of the hydraulic 29 content, and then we can come back to the other one.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Make sure we're looking at.
Package 2.
Yeah, is this, yeah, this is including right-of-way
Yes.
costs and utility cost estimates. There are several panel members in the room that have been working on this project for a year now, and the hydraulic advisory panel has made the recommendations for 3 separate packages for the MPO to apply for through Smart Scale. The first being package 1, which is everything. All of the transportation, recommended transportation improvements. I shouldn't say everything. One of the ones that the city is considering, the left turn onto hydraulic from the 250 bypass, was also part of this planning process, but the city's going to apply for that directly themselves. So that left these packages, and this includes a intersection improvement at 29 and hydraulic that is similar to the Rio in 29 intersection, except that it will have hydraulic going under 29, and there would be turning movements under 29 that would be occurring. A traffic signal underneath the north and southbound movement of 29. Also, there would be, to accommodate that intersection, roundabouts or intersection improvements at both the Whole Foods intersection as well as the Stonefield intersection, which are noted as B and C there. Also included are 2 2-lane overpasses that allow vehicular traffic, but really also focus on bike ped movement across 29. Those are D and E on the photo there. One's on the south end at Angus Road, right near Best Buy, and then the other is at Zan Road, which is D. In addition, and at D, there would be no access points to 29. It would strictly be an overpass bridge for vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians. But at the Angus Road crossover, there would be right in, right out allowances there. And in just a minute, I'll show you why that's so important at Angus. In addition to the Angus crossing, then, is what has actually been on the books for quite a while in some manner, is taking Hillsdale all the way from hydraulic, taking it not only to Holiday Drive, which was the original intent, but taking it all the way to the 250 bypass, so that people could actually move north and south without ever getting on 29, and especially for local traffic. To make that work, you see down around where G is shown, there are some X outs. To make that intersection work, that interchange, that ramp area would have to be removed. You would have too much of a weaving circumstance there with both of those ramp areas. So that particular ramp, all the other ramps, access points and exit points of that intersection would remain as they are today. It's just from the westbound 250 bypass to the 29 north movement would be removed.
Now, what about the 29 north to westbound bypass, which looks like it's Xed out and there's no alternative for those people if that's going.
They would go
If
up to
I'm-
Holiday, make a right, and loop around the quadrant, come back on the ramp.
And come up on
On the
G.
new, where the new ramp is located at G.
So leave Bodos, go under the bridge, go to.
Just
To
like this,
Holiday,
they would just do
Right
that.
there.
and then make the loop back.
So it's just a bigger loop.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
It also eliminates, there's a bad weave right there between the 29 ramp and the ramp to get on westbound.
And it's a 5 mile an hour curve, so.
Yeah,
It's
so-
pretty scary.
And
Good plan.
as kind of a reminder, one of the priority points of this project is to improve flow north and south on 29. That would, my little arrow going, that would remove that traffic signal from having to stop traffic. With that removed also, and having the right in, right out here, people who are traveling west on 250 bypass could, instead of taking hydraulic, could come off here. At this intersection, that would be a free flow to the left, where Hillsdale going towards 250 would be a stop condition. So if you were traveling that way, you would get off of the bypass, take a left without ever stopping, get to 29 north, and be able to in a yield situation, be able to take a right on the 29 north. And so you'd never hit a traffic signal until you were on up 29 north. So hopefully that would also help to alleviate some of the hydraulic traffic that's occurring now. This is application number 1. You can see the price tag of it. There's anywhere from $130 to $158 million it's estimated at now. Now, there is roughly $18 million left over from the current 6-year improvement plan projects. So we do have $18 million of existing funds to match this, which brings that down a little bit. But this is application 1.
What's the, so, not having done this before, what's the range of funding that's possible?
Well, it'll be all, make sure I'm hearing the question right, but it'll be all or nothing.
Okay.
So yeah, with Smart Scale, kind of the good part or the bad part, VDOT doesn't fund part of a project anymore. It used to be they might just fund engineering or fund it through acquisition. They either fund it through construction or they don't fund it at all now. So that if it becomes a project, it'll be completed.
But that's a good segue into the next pieces.
Yes.
Because we kind of try to anticipate how it could be broken up in a way that might make the cost more competitive. And it depends who else is at the table competing for the money.
Right.
Because of the amount of this project, this is competing statewide. I mean, we're competing against big projects in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, and it gives me the opportunity to get on my soapbox a little bit to say both of those areas have funding mechanisms to match their smart scale applications that we don't. So a lot of times, if they're asking for a $200 million project, they have $100 million of local funds.
Right, that's what I was.
Yes.
And so another uneducated question, but how, so with this whole list of, with all the 7 different projects, how did that get, was that generated here or was that that?
That panel, the panel that's been meeting for a year, we started with the land use small area plan based on the future growth expectations. Then we had a transportation component that began looking at roadway improvements. And they had, I mean, some of these are projects that have been looked at for 15 years in different phases and different studies. And then other things are brand new. The crossing at Zan is something, because of going out to the public and hearing the priority for bike ped access, that was a completely new idea for this. So because this is, quite frankly, a real stretch to hope for funding, we tried to break these up into more bite-sized pieces. And so application 2 will be just the improvements at the intersection and then the 2 Stonefield and Whole Food intersections. That's $60 to $80 million. We can take of that $18 million that's available, approximately $8 million of that, and match this project with those funds. So it helps to bring it down to, you know, a little bit, and may be able to help us with that.
And please explain, the extra 10 is used for Hillsdale South and is already assigned to them? So
Yes.
Nick didn't think that was the case, but you turned out to be, that is the case.
It is definitely the case, and Secretary Valentine, in meeting with her, said the roughly 18 million that's available, we could divide it up ever how we chose. But the panel decided to keep it as we've been considering it all along, with the balance of some existing funding that was approved for the intersection, using that for this project, and then application 3, which is Hillsdale, there's $10 million already approved for that project, so keeping that 10 million with that project and not trying to divide it up any other way, because from a year
Originally,
ago.
the 10 million was assigned to that.
Yes.
In a very generic way.
And one of the advantages of that, is my understanding too, is that if one of these projects does get awarded through Smart Scale, that will be approved over a 6-year period, but work could begin with either the $8 million or the $10 million that's already been approved. So design work could precede the Smart Scale award. So application 3 is the remaining projects of Angus, Zan, and Hillsdale extended all the way to 250 bypass. Again, very similar price tag of $60 to $80 million, and there's $10 million of funding existing that can be contributed towards that. These are the 3 hydraulic area projects. Each one has its pros and cons as far as how it will rank with Smart Scale, and the panel felt very comfortable. We actually had this scenario several weeks ago, spent 2 hours looking at it in a number of different variations a couple Thursdays ago, and at the end of that meeting said, you know what, we like it the way we've been looking at it for the last month or so, and kept everything exactly the same. There certainly is a little bit different with this project than the Rio project. There will be some land acquisitions with this. We don't have the right of way to meet all of the needs as we did with the Rio project, and that's what really brings the cost up. If you're familiar with the hydraulic and 29 intersection, there are some very large utility poles there that will have to be relocated. They're roughly $1 million a piece. So there are some costly elements.
It was bad enough at 50,000 a piece, $1 million a piece for a stupid telephone?
They're big.
I don't mean to argue with this, but what is sort of apparent though is that it does change the priority in a way. 3 becomes something that actually is felt almost to be more possible, whatever, than 1, because of the higher match and all that sort of thing. And so I can't quite wrap my brain around that because we know that the regional need is to get hydraulic. And certainly was the driving force that we got 5 years ago and still is, to my understanding. So we are somehow sort of, well, my perception is that we're changing that. So you may have already struggled through that with the panel and you all can just
We did.
let me have it.
One of the things, again, it's kind of, we talked about it and I think one of the end results was whatever we can get will really be a help. And it's all about scoring. Though there is some flexibility written into the legislation for the Commonwealth Transportation Board, they have yet, to my knowledge, to alter the scoring criteria for a project as it hit their table. They would have to answer that to say this is a long time project, we want to bump it above others. Now, one of the other things came out with the panel that should this project get awarded ahead of the intersection, it could very likely improve the construction activity at whatever time the intersection got funded, because you would have alternate routes during construction. It's very likely the hydraulic and 29 construction would not be done with the 63 days that Rio was done. It's just a much more complicated.
We already have alternative routes.
We'll
The one I use every day is Hillsdale to the Marriott to take a left, or whatever that homestay, and then over to 29.
I had a
Works
cab
beautifully.
take me down Hillsdale, just to the airport. Yeah, it was enjoyable.
Well, and the other thing that we were trying to really make sure that we didn't lose was item D. And item D could not be a standalone project.
Right.
And yet the panel felt very strongly that it was really important for economic development in the area. And even though you get points out of that, it's not the same as safety and congestion relief. So you get those points with E, F, and G. And that really does facilitate traffic. So that's why it made sense, though, to combine it with D with E, F, and G, because it did complete a bigger network in the region. And then, but we really don't know how this is going to fall out. I mean, and we were very concerned that just losing package 1 meant it was all or nothing, and we could easily get nothing, because what is the other competitive project that's looming large, that's huge?
I think it's 60.
It's a Hampton Road.
Yeah.
And that was like a magnitude of like 160 million.
I'm not sure how much they're gonna ask, but certainly it'll take the top congestion relief score.
Right, and it's big, but it's very high price tag, so there was only so many of these big ticketed projects that we could expect to win. But moving forward, we wanted to get one of these passed, and then it will make it easier for the next package to pass.
Did the panel have a priority of package 2 versus package 3?
It was kind of evenly, it was a draw. And because we saw benefits, huge benefits with the modeling with the E, F, and G.
Does package 3 assume that transit remains on 29? Oh, sure, okay,
They all
so,
do.
okay.
Yes.
So there must
They all
be
do.
some sort of mechanism to have a pedestrian go from being a bus rider on 29 North to being a pedestrian on the east-west crossing.
And we will even have areas that will show potential areas for transit stops. I mean, there's a lot more detail
yes,
there's more
than what's
detail
being
in this.
shown here,
There's a
so
lot
that,
more detail. I mean, you don't
Okay,
even
I don't need to dive, I just want to be sure that it was part of the,
Yeah, I was specific with the consultant to make sure that we actually noted where potential
Yeah.
transit stops might be.
Okay.
And that they're gonna be fully vetted with kiosks,
yeah, cause if you,
shelters and everything.
I'm happy just knowing that, cause if you just looked at this, you think, how do you go from being a bus rider to a pedestrian?
And likewise, the same concerns of the cycling and pedestrian community in general, and there is infinitely more detail.
Okay, great.
On that score as well.
and these improvements as well, and again, to VDOT, I mean, because I think you've created such a wonderful model here of doing the land use planning ahead of the transportation. What's not shown here too is how these transportation improvements tie into
The land use.
the bike and pedestrian and trailways and all of the modes of transportation that are included in the land use plan.
Including transit.
In transit, bike, pedestrian, on-street bicycle, as well as trailway bicycle.
Over the years at Chart CTAC, getting the transit space on 29 was always a challenge because of the throughput needed there. So having these alternate routes around for
Yes.
transit is really great. And just is a great benefit for that. So thank you. All right, other questions for Wood on this one? Do you want to tell us more about Fontaine before we do the vote on this?
Yeah, it's part of the same resolution.
Great.
I'm actually gonna defer to Chuck on Fontaine. I think he might be able to provide more the most up-to-date answers. And Kevin as well, because this is a county priority that the MPO is applying essentially on the county's behalf.
We've got a consultant on board that's gonna be doing the study. Actually gonna pull together a group of, not stakeholders per se, but a working group that's gonna consist of both representatives from the county, the city, the university, as well as VDOT and the residency staff, to try to look at various scenarios. They're gonna run through a tool that we use. They've already collected the traffic data and they're actually doing some of that work now, doing the preliminary evaluation, using what we use a VJust tool, which looks at all various alternatives at a high level, and then present those results with some little bit finer detail once they get those initial vetting done internal. And then they're gonna present that to us, and then we'll review that and come up with a recommended alternative they're gonna do forward. And I think we've even got some public involvement set up in next as part of that contract. So we're gonna try to get as much feedback as we can, so when we get done, we're gonna have a preferred alternative that is everybody supports.
And those are the outcomes of this.
That's what
You're not
outcome-
doing it in advance.
No, I
It's
mean,
it's if this gets funded.
well, we're gonna do that now.
Okay.
At a high level.
Okay.
Just to try to get some vetting beforehand, so that when we submit the project, we do have some kind of support. To submit the project, the county's gonna have to pass a resolution to support, in addition to the PDC submitting the project. So, that's basically any
To
question.
follow up on Becca's question, but number 2 is for the construction package,
Yes, it's
not
for the
just
whole
the
thing.
study.
It's for the whole
The
thing.
whole deal. Okay.
It's for the study and the construction. We're just studying the project to know what we're gonna submit as the project.
Okay, yeah, cause I was getting
And
a
they're
little
gonna
confused
develop-
about the,
They're gonna do a traffic analysis to come up with a preferred alternative, because for an interchange, you've gotta do that before you can submit the project. So that's what we're doing. And then, that's what this is gonna be.
and you'll work with the other entities, like through UVA, you'll go through the
Yes.
office of the architect to find
We'll
a
coordinate with the university who they want to be they're represented.
And you do that through the office of architect?
Should we,
Yes, okay, yeah, okay.
like I said, we're probably gonna be setting up that initial kickoff meeting probably in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I'll reach out to her and I know Kevin, I'll touch base with you and then, well, somebody from the MPO and then, somebody from the city, I don't know, Tony wants to have it.
I just wanna, since I'm here for Julia, I'll
Yeah,
give her,
no,
give
let
her
her
the
know
right
that,
update.
it's coming down the road.
Yeah.
But, Chris Daly's doing it for VHB.
Oh, VHB, great, yeah, that was my other question, who's
Yeah.
the consultant,
Yeah.
so,
He's the sub-consultant for Kittleson that's actually gonna be doing it for him.
okay, great, well, and he's not starting from scratch, as you know.
No, he's got a lot of information
Yeah.
already, so it's gonna be beneficial, he's gonna bring that to the table.
Great, perfect.
So, alright, any other questions about that? So, the plan is to have everything wrapped up by the middle of July, so we'll have a preferred scenario with cost estimate and concept plan by then.
Somebody kind of grossly put the geometry there and it'll work,
Yes.
okay. That's all. That's great. I mean, you should see how many napkins I have with the diversion time on Fontaine to see if it works.
I've got it, on the same.
I have several versions of it if you ever need that kind of analysis.
Yeah.
Mostly scribbled it.
I mean, this dates back from many years ago, and we wanted to look at this before, so.
Great, thank you.
Alright, anybody else have questions?
Well, it's not relevant to this, but I'll ask it anyway, and that is, there is something happening in the interim, correct? Something about
There is a
the
project
eastbound
that's currently
business that's
funded to do it's basically converting the existing ramp, the northbound to eastbound, or the northbound ramp off 29 to Fontaine, to widen it to accept, it basically makes, right now, if you're coming off 64, you wanna go north on 29, you have to get over a lane. If you wanna get on to go off on Fontaine, you have to get over a lane, and those two movements conflict. Well, the project is gonna basically, if you're coming off 64 from the westbound to go northbound, you're still gonna have to get over a lane to go northbound. But if you're coming northbound on 29 from like the eastbound direction, you can just choose which lane you wanna go into. So it's a choice lane instead of a merge or a weave. So it's just making that minor modification to the ramp to make it operate much better and more efficiently and safer. So that project was funded the last round of Smart Scale. It's gonna start, it's probably gonna be starting the design process soon.
So that can, details on that can be reviewed at the Smart Scale website with
Yes.
with projects.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
And then the changes from the bypass southbound to 64 eastbound of doing away with that circle and having some stop crossover.
Yes.
Is that still alive?
Yes.
Oh.
It's moving forward, and it's grouped with this other project, they're going to go.
So it is part of what you just described,
Yes.
okay.
I mean, it's a separate component of it, and basically what it does is, right now, when you're going southbound and you wanna go eastbound, there's a loop ramp you have to take. It's closing that loop ramp and putting a left turn lane on 29 southbound to turn left onto the northbound on-ramp on 64. And what that does is, the loop ramps up on 64 has a really short weave issue, where those people are coming up and the people getting off, and that's really bad. It causes crashes and rear end collisions on 64 almost on a daily basis, and it eliminates that as a problem. So that's going to be a major benefit. So those, like I said, those were funded. One of them was an HSIP project and one of them was a Smart Scale project.
But they're both funded.
They're both funded and they're moving forward.
And there's a traffic light somewhere that's gonna stop
There
the
is
northbound
there's a
traffic to
traffic
let
light
the trucks across to eastbound.
south of the interchange, to stop this northbound traffic so the westbound, southbound, or eastbound traffic can make that left turn.
And the comparable side to that northbound would be going around to Fontaine and coming around that.
We're looking at that as an option, if that's feasible, and that's, the space underneath is very limited underneath that bridge.
The left under on Fontaine is very short for a
It's really-
60-foot box.
Yeah.
So maybe 2 lights and everybody's going at the same time, that's what, because
The
I will tell you
magnet
that,
is
We're gonna analyze it to see if it's gonna work.
Okay.
So,
Good luck.
more
Stay
to
tuned,
come.
wait to hear.
Yeah.
More to come, we'll have some concepts and we'll probably bring them before the board at that time, once we get something.
I know you all are watching and aware that on a regular basis, there are 10 or 15 trucks in the northbound left lane, sitting, waiting to go west on 64, and that is a horrendous safety problem, so I know you're working on it, so that's great. Are there more resolutions, discussion before we have a motion on what we've just heard? Any other questions for Wood or Chuck?
What's the timeframe for Fontaine to possibly?
Hopefully we're gonna have something, a kickoff meeting in probably the next 2 weeks, and then.
And when would breaking ground next?
Oh, yeah, it'll be, we're looking at funding 23, 24. It's not gonna be
5 or 6
funded for probably, funding becomes available, we're not gonna, construction won't start for 5 or 6 years.
We're starting to send our kids to daycare right across the street, so I'm actually gonna start taking Fontaine right across their reservoir road. Just curious.
All the years of having a teenage driver on that loop with the 50-yard swim swam.
Well, they'll probably be teenagers.
They'll be
They'll be,
teenagers.
that's right, okay.
Just was curious.
All
No, they'll
right.
be having children of their own.
Well, that is true, back in, for the old timers, they were complaining about this about a week after it opened back in the
Yeah.
sixties.
I know, these
Just drove
projects
yesterday.
have a long gestation period.
All right, so we are looking for then a resolution endorsing the submission of smart scale HB2 applications by the MPO.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, any opposed? No, that carries, thank you very much, Wood.
Thank you.
And so are you done? Okay, so now we are moving on to the 2045 LRTP with Jacob Feldy. I'm glad to know better how to pronounce your last name. I was calling you just by your first name for a long time. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Jacob Zumfeldy, if you wanna try to pronounce it right, no problem if you don't. I'll be giving an update here on the LRTP, a couple of different pieces of that. We moved the timeline up to second because we know that is kind of important in giving context, so start with some of the updates on the travel demand model that we've been giving updates on, we've been talking about, then talk about the timeline, and then some of this project review and scenario evaluation aspect. So starting with the model update, we recently, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, got the completed model, the final steps of having that fully completed and for our use by the consultants. So we are in the process of using that, doing some changes to make it so that we are able to use that to identify capacity deficiencies in the transportation network and also to assess potential projects. So with the project review criteria and the scenario review criteria. So as far as the model, we provided you a lot of information on the inputs into the model. This was something that you had asked about last time and that we will be having you approve at the July meeting. So in the packet here, it's attachment A and B. There is detailed information about the TAZs, the traffic analysis zones, and the 2015 and 2045 employment and population data that we're using in the travel demand model. So are there any questions? There are also some general maps to show growth in the region that is being modeled. I will note that the travel demand model does include areas that are outside of the MPO region. So you'll see some of the maps and some of the information is outside of the MPO region.
So where in this packet would we talk about the criteria and talk about more of the suggestions made by Morgan Butler during public comment about
That will
refocusing on the multimodal side?
That will be in just a few
Just a
slides
minute,
here,
okay,
so
so I'll lose
yes,
that.
I wanted to first ask for any feedback on the detailed numbers. I don't have anything new to present that isn't in the packet, but yes, on the input to the travel demand model. So yes, then I'll be moving on to timeline, then onto the project and scenario.
And Jacob, you'll be working with the local government staff to look at the numbers, just for
We have,
those estimates.
yes, so that's exactly where we got this information, yes, this came from the local staff. They put quite a bit of effort into making sure we had accurate current and future information.
This has also been presented several times to the technical committee and CTAC as well.
Jacob, do you have a total on the population delta? I mean, you can look at it for each TAS ID, but in terms of the total for the region, what that delta is.
We have looked at those numbers, I don't have them in front of me. I mean, we just mentioned that the localities have provided kind of that detailed TAZ by TAZ kind of idea of the growth. We should also mention that the original kind of broad overview of demographic changes and growth came from the Weldon Cooper Center population.
So yeah, it is benchmarked to the Weldon Cooper, the closest estimate available to that 2045 date in what the Weldon Cooper Center produces.
So that was kind of the baseline. There wasn't like we could have chosen any number for the whole region as far as.
Yeah. Well, and the reason I asked, I mean, you have some areas where you get zero growth and some areas where you get 10 times.
And others where you have reductions in employment, I'm thinking, what happened to Earlysville that we're supposed to be losing all these people? So, I don't know. It'll be fun to, now it's much easier for me to see this, use this on paper, so I'm glad to try again from what I was looking at in the packet. How to track these down?
How do TAZs relate to census tracts?
In general, they relate to blocks. There are some places where a block has to be split or block geography has to be not used because the block geography does not necessarily line up exactly with things like future roads and in our region especially boundaries such as mountain hill ranges. Yeah.
Monticello is a good example. That zone crosses over the mountain. There's not a road that goes from one side to the other side, but you've got population on both sides that go different ways to in and out. So you've got to split that in different ways. Those are some of the things that get resolved.
Yeah, you can see that in the zone numbers 3554. Page 15, right above the word final.
Awesome. Goes from 20 over to now.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, any other thoughts or questions on that at this point? On just the numbers? Attachment there. Okay, now I will move on. So also as part of the model, there is a network that includes the major roadways. So this is something we'll be providing more information to you at the July meeting and having kind of the model as a whole with these inputs, the network approved or officially approved by the policy board. So here's an initial view of the network, and you'll notice there are some red lines there indicating the new projects that have been either committed to, some of the projects we're already talking about, or built since 2015. So you notice in the numbers, it's 2015 population, 2015 is the base year that the model is using, and then 2045 is the future year. And some of the initial outputs of the model here, we do have congestion maps showing road level of service that are being produced currently by the model. And so this will be used in the project and scenario evaluation. So base year 2015, road level of service, and future year 2045 with those existing and committed projects included here, some level of service. So some of these 2045 numbers will be shown in, or an indication of potential congestion will be shown in a few slides that Wood will be going over later, zooming in on certain locations and looking at various deficiencies, not just congestion. So as far as the timeline, this is attachment E in your packet. Like I said, I decided to move it up here to give a little more context. So at this meeting, and the July meeting, we'll be finalizing and presenting to you the model and some of the deficiency analysis that we're doing regarding all sorts of transportation deficiencies or potential room for improvement in the region, as well as the measures and methods, which we'll be getting to in just a moment here, and then the projects that will be considered for this LRTP, for inclusion in the LRTP. So at the July meeting, we'll have a very busy meeting with a number of these things and be looking to start at that point grouping these projects into scenarios, as we're calling them. So last time, for those of you who are here, we went through the scenario evaluation criteria, and I'll be mentioning those again in a few minutes here. So there's evaluating kind of on an initial level each project that is potentially going to be included in this LRTP, and then there's grouping those projects into scenarios for an evaluation as far as using that group of projects as the final preferred scenario for the LRTP. So yeah, this is our thoughts on a timeline at this point, and the July meeting will be quite busy.
Do you include smart scale application projects in this?
So the ones that have already been funded will be referenced in the LRTP, but they will not need to be in the constrained long-range transportation plan.
But this is the interval where you update the model to show the new 29 solutions things as existing and operating. And
Okay, that's, I guess that's what I was getting at.
Yes,
I've been frothing at the mouth for years.
The way the long range plan shows it, you basically have a 6-year plan, and then you have a 20-year plan. So it's basically, you're gonna see this, the smart scale projects in the 6-year portion with those funding, and then we're gonna basically look at the forecasting money beyond that 6-year plan.
We'll briefly get back to the financial aspect later. And one other thing that we have a slide on later is we do have a public meeting coming up in a couple weeks in June. So we'll be referencing that, giving the details on that again. So regarding the project review and the scenario evaluation criteria, kind of a bit of background as far as when we're looking to create these criteria, both at the project level and the scenario level. We have the 6 LRTP 2045 goals and 20 objectives. So that's what has been approved by this board a number of months ago. We also have various other requirements regarding Title VI, environmental justice, and ecological impact that are very important to consider as we look at projects and scenarios for the LRTP. And then also the MAP 21 federal legislation that has performance measures that have been going through VDOT, and that we will be setting associated, in coordination with VDOT, standards for certain performance measures. So that's another thing that will be included in this LRTP process in general. So looking at details, or rather the project review aspect of this. So the summary of this project review in general is that it will provide a simplified overview of the impact of the project. So generally as calculated by the model, the impact on congestion, the impact on transit ridership, and then separately from the model, since unfortunately the model does not have bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure built in, we will be showing as part of the project review whether a certain amount of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, if a mile of bike path is built, that will be shown as part of the project review. So in general, the project review is assessing these environmental, social, and other impacts of projects that aren't evaluated by the scenario performance measures. So this ensures that project impacts are communicated during the scenario evaluation process. So this is what was provided in your packet, or rather this attachment D is what describes the different pieces that will be shown as part of the project review piece of this process. So as I mentioned, there will be some information shown about congestion, about transit ridership, about bike ped improvements, and then the project impacts, whether they're positive or negative, related to environmental design, environmental impacts, social impacts, historical site impacts, and then also if any of the projects have impacts on interregional corridors or interregional transit or operations and maintenance aspects in the region. So I do have one example on this, and yeah, feel free to provide any feedback in general here. So for instance, if the bypass, this is a project that was in the last constrained long-range plan, the potential to widen the bypass between the exit 118 interchange of I-64 and Barracks Road. So this would widen it from 4 lanes to 6 lanes for that area. And so the model can produce an impact on congestion. Also, if this were to have any impact on transit ridership, it would be shown there. And if any bicycle and pedestrian facilities were included as part of this project, that would be shown at the top there.
Do we ever look at trends between long-range transportation plans to see if we've improved over the decades? So like, is there, well, like, you've got every plan, 6-year plan, like, and you've done all these careful, kind of small for impacts on design, environment, social, but do you ever know from plan to plan whether we're getting better? Is there an end game, or like, is there a target congestion relief number? Is there a target?
I would say those targets would be kind of on the regional network. So some of the things that we're looking at for the scenario measures would be things where those targets could be set. I mean, they certainly haven't been set currently. But yes, I think there could be some comparison.
And I bring this up because it's something that, our comprehensive plans don't really do. In that we keep coming up with goals and we're not very good at identifying implementation strategies that can be measured from comp plan to comp plan. And I just wondered if there was any mechanism here.
I think
if that makes sense as a corollary.
I think the attempt in transportation planning to address that is laid out in the MAP 21 performance measures, which focus in on both statewide and MPO overall performance. Those involve, if you may recall, we adopted the state targets for safety, reductions in percentages of crashes per 100 million mile vehicles traveled. That is kind of the new thing, and that's looking at overall in aggregate how our transportation system is doing.
And
that's
fairly new.
That's brand new. We're setting initial targets. So that's the thing that you
could begin looking at over time.
And there is requirements FAST Act and MAP 21 that the state and the MPO has to revisit these measures on a schedule. And especially for the state, if they set a target and they don't meet a target, there is discussions that have to occur of why maybe that target was set incorrectly,
Sure, and I mean,
or
population's changing all the time, there's all these things going on at the same time.
yeah, and
I just wondered if there was any.
that is the system to look at our performance over time versus it's not really on the plan.
Right.
Yeah.
So even if as long as those relationships are getting better, it doesn't matter how much our population grows, if our transportation improvements are keeping pace with it and getting ahead of it, we should be seeing consistency in performance from MAP 21 to MAP 21.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking, if you looked at it, and there was a glaring problem with a plummeting metric at some point, you would know that you're not keeping pace and the population's just outstripping our resources to keep up.
Yes, and
I'm just trying to understand that.
we see trends like that, especially in safety,
Okay.
where early indications are that that statewide safety numbers are not necessarily moving in the direction that you would like to see, but there, we know there's a lot of factors in safety when it comes to roadway usage.
Because federal stats I've seen have shown increases in pedestrians. Okay.
So that's crashes with a bike and pedestrian involving a motor vehicle, essentially, to clarify that.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, because the congestion numbers there are from the model, so it takes into account all of the all of the whole network, and whether anything else has been improved. Now, the reason that we do this kind of scenario aspect, where we take these projects with a kind of overview, project review first, and then combine them in scenarios, is that if that, one ramp is a separate project, in this case, if it's already been funded, then it will already be in the modeling network. But if it isn't funded yet, and it's still listed as a separate network, we can see that yes, it's best to put them together to get the impact. It is also true that the model has some certain ways that it doesn't, for instance, treat intersections as much of, it doesn't necessarily accurately represent the fact that intersections can back up traffic. It does show a slowdown, but it doesn't fully represent some aspects of the transportation network. So that is another way in which, yes, it will represent improvements, but yeah, there are sometimes limitations with certain aspects.
And secondly, is there an affordability index somewhere? Because I look at the replacements of the railroad bridge and the old Ivy Road Bridge as being lots of zeros, which sort of puts it into the almost never possible category. So are you taking that into consideration when you're looking at something like this, which I sort of see in the 2075
projects
timeframe, not anytime soon?
on this stage of evaluation will not be constrained. Constraining, as in the last plan, occurs once the basket of projects has been kind of developed. And because with the funding stream and the discussion that we've had around that, if we limit ourselves based on that, we could end up missing good projects that there might be alternative funding available for us that just hasn't been identified. We don't know what the funding situation is going to be 10 years from now, let alone 20 years from now. So it's important, as we've seen with many of the projects that were built as part of Solutions 29, those existed on LRTPs for quite a while before they were implemented. These are long-range plans. This is not our smart scale punch list. These are those long-range, those forward-thinking projects that are working to solve those problems that we see in the future. And the other component is, these are projects that are in some way regional in nature.
So you went over attachment C briefly, and that would be the place where we would look at this scenario measure,
Yes.
vehicle hours of delay, and widen that to have it be a person hours in order to make sure that we were doing the multimodal look on that.
Yes, so let me address that in just a second. So yes, broadly speaking, the performance measures, these, as I mentioned before, we discussed in depth last time, and are provided, as you mentioned, as attachment C. So 10 to 12 simplified measures that are in relation to the LRTP goals and objectives, and these will allow for scenario comparisons. So comparing one scenario to another as far as its improvement or not improvement on these 10 to 12 different measures. As far as specifically, yes, I do want to address the question about vehicle hours of delay versus person hours of delay. We will do what we can. We're limited by the model in that it provides information about the vehicle hours of delay. I believe it might actually calculate person hours of delay, but if it does, I think it's with a standard, like, there are 1.7 people per vehicle, so it's just going to multiply the vehicle hours of delay times the number of people in each vehicle. So that's something we can look into more to determine if there is a way to calculate transit delay, but I'm not aware that that is something. Unfortunately, I've already referenced the fact the model doesn't include bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Transit is kind of a somewhat recent in the last couple of years thing to be integrated in these travel demand models. So it's not as mature as far as providing these sorts of outputs, but we are, certainly understand that that would be a more preferable measure to have person hours of delay.
Especially when it's referring to the transportation system under congestion, not just the roadway.
Right.
So whatever you can do to manage that better to make sure we don't lose track of that also, because.
I think Jacob will get into this, but we've attempted to balance all of that with the very multimodal mix of measures included here. And one point that I'll make is that in things like increasing ridership on transit or increasing mode choice will be positively show up when we look at things like LOS and delay. For example, if we were to take an existing roadway that might have a poor level of service, and we were to provide an efficient and effective a bus commuting option on that corridor, pulling those people out of those SOV vehicles will show an improvement in those numeric measures.
Correct. Could you explain the scenario measure? It's for accessibility and mobility that is with access to transit. What do you mean by
The
measure being
multipliers.
total population within a quarter mile and you multiply them and divide them?
Yes, so that specific part of the measure is meant to calculate not just if someone has access to a bus stop that is near them, but how often there's a bus that comes to that bus stop. So yeah, just as far as terminology here, headway is how often, generally speaking, a bus comes to a bus stop. So peak headway being the busiest, the time of day when there are the most buses. Peak headway of 20 minutes or less would mean that a bus comes, or is scheduled at least once every 20 minutes or less. So this is saying that if there are 1,000 people who live within a quarter mile of a certain bus stop, if there's a bus that runs, or if there's a bus that comes less than every 20 minutes, we'll multiply that 1,000 people by 2 to say those people are best served by transit. If that bus only comes once an hour, we'll divide that 1,000 people by 2 and say, okay, that's only worth 500 in this measure. So it's a way of encouraging or rewarding, measuring that sort of paying or improving service. It's a way of measuring improved service as opposed to just saying every bus stop around the whole region is the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because at first I was thinking that it was like, almost like a policy directive that to get 20 minutes or less headway, you're gonna double your population for a month.
No,
But I just didn't know what the, why you.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of terminology.
I mean, we maybe have to, but I don't know. Well, I've heard that you need like at least 10 dwelling units per acre to get a big one. We don't crack 5 acres. We need to see one.
Other questions? All right, what's next? Let's see, so, activities.
So yes, this actually it would probably be good for me to reference just very few things have changed in general regarding these scenario performance measures. One of the things that we talked about at the last meeting here and that has been refined a bit is regarding these activity centers and UDAs. So there are a few measures here that relate to activity centers. So one being assure activity centers are designed to accommodate, there's one here.
Can we get this
Yeah.
Send it to us.
Yeah, we'll absolutely send it to you. I'm realizing that there's colors on that map that are not projecting at all. For example, all the UDAs are just showing up as gray outlines and they should actually be colored.
Okay.
The activity centers are based on the TAZs that we were referencing earlier. So it's that's our smallest unit of measure when it comes to the transportation analysis is the TAZ. And activity centers are kind of the TAZs where we see multiple activity trends. So probably the best way to describe these would be locations that are the opposite of just residential.
So they're mixed use.
They're mixed use or they're destinations like major employment centers, major commercial centers, places where people, I guess in a modeling sense, they would be a net attractor for trips.
And the UDAs are repositories for growth.
Correct, and those are UDAs as defined in meeting the state code requirements. So it's a way to reward projects and activities that occur in our growth areas.
So that's why it was really important to get the hydraulic
Yes.
area plan identified as a UDA.
And this is something that is in keeping with what Smart Scale does as a way of encouraging improvements where you have population or where you are going to have greater population growth. All right. So I'm going to run through some items that we've been looking at for past couple months and refining in terms of data. I will point out that there is an aggregate map and poster of this information on the back wall there. It's a little easier to see. These, of course, when we get into some of the modeling components, they're still draft outputs. The model is still in the process of refining. We're still working with VDOT and consult. This is the spatial distribution of safety concerned areas as defined by a data set that VDOT maintains called PSI, Potential for Safety Improvement. And what you're seeing here is points representing intersections and then orange lines representing segments that fall within the top quartile of locations that are of safety concern. So they have reached a certain level of crashes per year and a level of severity. We also have bridge sufficiency ratings. These are bridge and culvert structures that have received a poor rating. This again is a data set that VDOT provides and is updated as they do their bridge and culvert inspections. So what we've done is we've taken all that data and stitched it together with what we're getting is in the way of model outputs. And these are, it's harder to see on the screen, but the yellows and the reds represent those level of services E and F, which are the poorest level of services for the future year of 2045.
So that's 250.
So that's 250 in Pantops, so we can start to see a string of segments there that is both of safety concern, which is the gray, and then the congestion concern. And then there's some safety locations. You will notice this is an example of an existing and committed project that's been included. This already is factoring in the DDI that was funded at 124. So we've kind of, this is kind of the makings of identifying
What is the DDI?
diverging diamond interchange.
Diverging.
Sorry.
I know it's not DDI, I just couldn't remember what it was doing.
So this is the US 250 29 kind of western edge. We can see those level of service, for lack of a better term, hotspots. We actually can see bridge deficiencies, safety concerns on 29 business. You can see things start to appear on our clover leaves and locations like that. 29 North. This is an area where, other than the safety things popping up, we're actually seeing a considerable amount of improvement from models past. So this is hydraulic.
Yes, and Raya.
Raya, yeah. So you can see that the widening has, it's kind of off the screen now, but that is something that's not really popping up in red anymore as a congestion hotspot in the future because of the mitigations that we've done. Downtown.
Wood Street.
Mm-hmm.
McIntyre's bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a little bit around that Free Bridge.
Wood Bridge.
Yeah, that area.
And then it looks like, is that Emmett, Ivy?
Mm-hmm.
Is it?
Yeah. So this is the kind of result that we're starting to see as outputs from the modeling process. And we're going to be taking this and overlaying our existing projects, to do a check, make sure that projects that were in the last LRTP are still projects that are identifying, are addressing needs and coming out of this modeling. And then working with all the MPO committees, city and county staff to identify projects or county and city needs that kind of will feed into that project hopper for those scenarios. So this is kind of that early part of that process is kind of seeing what's going on. Any questions on any of that before I jump to the quick mention?
So
of
what happens, like, you get all these, this kind of analysis, and so at some point this is going to be turned into packages of projects?
Correct. It might be, for example, looking at a corridor like 250 Pantops and saying, okay, we see that there are safety issues, there are congestion issues, there are maybe pavement condition issues. What sort of project would help us solve that? And it could be something, super street. It could be increased frequency in headways of transit. It could be looking at the county comprehensive plan and seeing that the county has identified that as converting it to more of a boulevard type street.
Could you ever bring back a smart scale project that was abandoned?
Sure.
I'm just thinking,
Sure.
because I remember
Absolutely.
looking at this when there was that idea of another parallel, but it was another bridge over the Rivanna, but it was to the,
Tubby's.
which one was that? It was
Yeah,
Tubby's.
absolutely.
And that was also
Easily.
really, it ranked really high, as I remember, with good transit options.
Because one of the things that they had looked at in the previous LRTP was expanding transit to Pantops and how to address the congestion, getting the buses across the existing.
Right, you needed a way for them to jump that.
I think the other thing where this is very helpful is not only identifying the areas in need of improvement, but helping us to educate the community when we go out for the public engagement portion of this, because believe me, there are people who live on 29 North who think that's the worst congested area in the region. And it helps us to say the data doesn't support that. But in the community engagement process, we'll get suggestions for improvements in areas that it's just not needed. So this really helps us and gives us
Sure,
support
that
to
has to
answer
start
that.
early and often,
Yes.
and get it in a way that people can understand it.
Yes.
Well, and it reinforces work that we did with the streets that work. A lot. Rich McIntyre. Still bad.
And these are context sensitive, I mean, you're not trying to run everything through there at 50 miles an hour because this is a
No,
city, and so you're
no.
looking at the 35 mile an hour,
Exactly.
25 mile an hour capacity
And that's
to keep
level of service
cars
takes that
moving
into account.
closer together.
It takes the
Type of roadway
Yeah,
and
it's
the
it's
expected
based on
performance.
class, I mean, you evaluate the road, you assign it a number based on speed, number of lanes, and the type of facility it is. And those all factor in the algorithms that will come up with those, how much traffic can use that road.
All right.
Great.
On the funding side, this was something that was shared at the last meeting, and this is just a reminder to let you all know that we're still working on piecing that together. We've been discussing with VDOT the possibility of looking at the numbers using some alternative methodologies. One thing would be looking at our past performance in the past 2 rounds of Smart Scale and seeing if there's a way to factor that. And that kind of tidbit would be just the back of the envelope calculation. Our average over the 2 rounds of Smart Scale is about a $33 million amount. So we are actively looking at ways that we can paint a better picture of the anticipated funding. So expect to hear more on this often. And just a reminder, this is important because one of the hallmarks of a long-range transportation plan is the end product, the list of transportation projects are fiscally constrained based on some rationale behind expected funding. So it's a wish list, but it can't be too crazy of a wish list. All right.
Great.
That's kind of all the funding piece.
All right. So does that complete number 7? The LRTP?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Then we can move on to staff reports, tip adjustments. Farouk, are you here? There you are, thank you.
Hello everyone, for this possible meeting, we received 1 tip adjustment from the RTP. It involves funding allocation changes for 3 CAT projects and 10 JUMP projects. So with that, we have the whole transit summary table, JUMP summary table, and CAT summary table modified, and the specific tables are found in your meeting packets. So specifically, it involves some of the programs listed over here, such as FTA 5307, which is the urbanized area formula grants, FTA 5311, which is formula grants for rural areas, and FTA 5339, which is grants for buses and bus facilities formula program. And the fiscal years, specific fiscal years that involved in this funding allocation changes range from fiscal year 18 all the way up to fiscal year 21. And there has been some transfers of funds from one fiscal year to another, some decreases and some increases overall. If you can move on to the next one. So these three are the CAT projects that got their funding allocation changes, CAT 1, 2, and 3, mainly for fiscal year 19, and project 3 got 3 fiscal years, 18, 19, and 20, had their funding allocation changed. And the surface transportation program has also changed its funding allocation for this fiscal year. If you can move on to the next one. And obviously with these 3 projects had their changes, it was also reflected on the summary table of CAT, and the specific table is found in the meeting packet. These are the 10 JUMP projects involved in this adjustment, and project 2 and 9, as you can see here, had the whole 4 fiscal years changed, rest of them only involved mostly fiscal year 19. And with these 10 project changes, JUMP summary table is also reflected these changes, and mainly these 3 programs, FTA programs, and also the service transportation program involved the changes. Next one.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So we got the transit summary table changed, the JUMP summary table changed, and the CAT summary table, and we also included the specific projects and the specific fiscal years that the changes involved in your meeting packet. So if you have any questions regarding that, I can respond to you guys here. If not, we can move on to the next one.
There's a lot of trust involved in this because I don't have a clue what all those things are. And so between you and Chuck, as long as all the numbers were matched.
Yeah.
This wasn't me.
This is DRP2.
Okay, DRP2, all right, great.
Perhaps it is good, just as a reminder, because a very good question came up at the CTAC meeting of, well, is this saying that because public transit ridership is down, are we losing funds? And the answer was no, not at all. These are administrative changes, moving money from one year, one pot to another, because either something wasn't spent somewhere, or a need was there that brought it out of a different fiscal year. It's just kind of like rearranging the slices of pie in a pie shell. You move them around, but it's still the same pie over the long term.
The same number of cherries in the piece.
Yes.
But reappropriating.
You're just
basically what we're doing
moving
is
things
moving from one fiscal year
around
to another.
based on circumstances at the state and in some cases even at the federal level of taking money from one fiscal year to another. So these are administrative. You asked a couple of years ago that we at least give you the numbers so that you're aware of what we're doing administratively.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did this.
I just want to add one point. If the total, funding allocation changed and exceeded certain, limits, it would have required an amendment instead of an adjustment. So in that case, we would have wanted your approval, obviously, and then give a more specific of an explanation of why that happened.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Kurt before we go on? All right, thank you very much. Grant resolution in support of the AC grant application. Good.
Before we get to that, I need to mention that
VDOT has brought to our attention that there will be one additional administrative tip modification that we need to mention, which is to include some boilerplate language from the state tip to align ours with the performance-based planning, which is the MAP 21 we were discussing earlier. So far, the only measure that will be specifically addressed in that tip language will be safety, but it does provide information on the scheduled rollout for the additional performance measures. And as those roll out, there will be additional administrative modifications to that kind of introductory section of the tip. And it's just kind of an FYI, we're working with VDOT to make those changes, and in doing so, that keeps our tip relevant. And I think we have a deadline at the end of this month to make sure that happens. Yeah.
Okay.
We're waiting on some draft language. The federal government, they came out with some guidelines for what to include about a month or two ago. And then we developed what we were gonna add to modify our step with the language, and then we forwarded that language to the MPO to make the modification to theirs. So it's just adding that language to outline what the safety performance measure entails.
And this is also a change that we will be seeing eventually when we get our new 3C agreements.
Yes.
They will be also addressing performance-based planning in those documents, which is something that is a change from our currently active 3C agreements.
And 3C is?
What does 3C mean?
Yeah, Chuck?
He's thinking. That's why he was pausing,
Continuing,
thinking.
collaborative.
Okay.
Thank you.
Continuing collaborative.
MOU type stuff, in other words.
Yeah.
And just that's the agreement the MPO has with Albemarle County, City of Charlottesville, VDOT, DRPT, JON, and CAT as part of the city. We brought to you a year ago because of the need to update our 3C agreement. The best way I describe it is that neither JON nor CAT have the same name today as they did when that agreement was signed. It's been that long. But in the process of us updating ours, the state identified that they needed to be updated in other places, so they're developing a template that we'll be able to modify to fit our unique situation here, and so it's at VDOT right now.
It's actually been completed. It's under review by the Attorney General's office to make sure that all the legal stuff is correct. We should be getting it soon. I think a few of the MPOs, Northern Virginia and Bristol and Kingsport and mostly Hampton Roads, they wanted to use some different language, so theirs are going to be different. But we're trying to make them consistent across the state. But it will include all of the information on the performance measures as well, so we can sort of address everything with one document. But hopefully we'll have that in the next couple of months, so hopefully sooner than that. So they were trying to get it out many months ago. It's been dragging. So I'll know more. Actually, we're going to talk about it tomorrow at our monthly planning WebEx, so I may have some more information.
Okay, great. So on to the Bill Used to Be Tiger grant.
Correct.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Come on,
Kevin. Okay.
This is an Albemarle County request. Albemarle County is applying for a build grant, aka Tiger, for a project up near the airport. And I'll let
Yeah, that's
Mr.
right.
McDermott explain that.
And most of you have seen this project before. It was applied for in Smart Scale last round and didn't get funded. Since then, we've been moving forward with getting design done and have been working with some of the other local stakeholders. So the project is proposed. It would extend. Do we have any map? Sure. This is an extension of Berkmar Drive north of Hollymead, the Hollymead development. So right now, Berkmar ends at Timberwood, I believe is the name of the road. And this would push it through up to Airport Road and then beyond to connect to Lewis and Clark on the UVA Foundation property. The UVA Foundation is a partner in this with us, and the build grant, of course, is trying to look for economic development projects, the transportation projects, and because the UVA Foundation is one of our largest landholders of undeveloped land that could be used for economic development, we think this is a strong application. So they own everything down to just shy of Airport Road there, and you can see where the University of Virginia Research Park is. It connects to 29 up there on the northern end, and this whole thing would also act as a parallel network to 29, so it continues the work that we've done with the Berkmar extension.
So where does it pick up in the south?
Right where it says center, airport
so-
center.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
That's the fire station right there, that sort of loop road. That ends right there, and it goes from the end of the loop road all the way up to Lewis and Clark.
So you can see right now, this is Timberwood, and this is Berkmar, and it just ends right here. What we want to do with this project is extend it up across this property to a new intersection here at Airport Road. The proposal that we're looking at right now is to turn this intersection into a roundabout, and then make some improvements along Innovation Drive, which right now only provides access to the fire and rescue station, and then it would continue it on up this way and connect into the existing Lewis and Clark Drive. Like I said, all of this is UVA Foundation.
And the UVA Foundation is willing to do that.
Yeah, they have been working towards this for a long time. This is something they want. They have a lot of parcels that they don't have access to, but they would love to market up in this area. So
you're going for a build grant, or you've got one?
we are going for one. The application, this was just announced about a month ago with the notice of funding, and the application is due in mid-July. This is, of course, like Tiger, an extremely competitive grant, but we think we have a great project here. Another interesting thing about this is they are looking for rural projects, and by the census definition, this is a rural census tract. So so we can get a lot of points out of that. Besides the economic development, the parallel network that we're building to 29, so congestion relief, all of that stuff, I think this is a really strong project. And partnerships with the foundation, the county, the airport being right there. So it checks a lot of boxes for us.
And the UVA Foundation, I don't know if it's completed yet, but I think that it is. If not, it's gotta be close. Is they are looking at a renewed development plan for the research part, bringing it more into the needs of today's business who wants coffee shops and dry cleaners and even possibly residential units.
Well, it's really interesting, because way back when, with the Places 29 study, like 2007, and I was working on the team, we tried to show them that they needed neighborhood centers within their, the North Fork, and wouldn't have anything to do with it. So this is pretty exciting.
Things have changed.
Yeah.
They absolutely are looking at that. They're looking at the potential. Right now, this is all zoned for generally industrial use, so they would need to do a rezoning to add all these other uses, but they're working on a master plan that looks at that. So some residential all through here, and try and tie it into, the Hollymead development, which is one of our fastest growing areas in the county, or the fastest growing area in the county right now. So we need an MPO resolution to include with that grant. That's what we're looking for.
Well, I will make a motion, and others can weigh in, to support the county 2018 Bill Grant application for Lewis and Clark Drive connector road.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good, that carries, thank you very much, Kevin. And so that is done, and now we're to the point where Chip, you were gonna talk about this email,
Yes,
which I have not yet read, but you may have to take it home and read it.
Wassenaar. Yes, if you want to come up and I'll give you an opportunity. As I briefed you earlier, this is a request that came in quite a while ago. We made you aware and we were waiting until we got further along into the hydraulic planning effort. The city of Charlottesville staff asked the MPO that when the request was made to abandon some right of way, city staff knew that it was in the general area of some of the hydraulic and Hillsdale improvements. And so they asked that the MPO take a look at this. And after briefing the policy board several months ago, it was determined to wait until the hydraulic planning effort got a little bit further along. So now the property owners have asked for this relook of it, and have what you have before you today. As I mentioned earlier, you just saw this, so I don't think anything is expected to be passed, or even if you choose to send a recommendation to the city. As I said, this is something fairly new for the MPO Policy Board to get involved with. But I think as we kind of walk through this, you will see how it is very closely tied into the hydraulic project. And but with that, I'll let you kind of walk through what you have in mind.
Thank you. I really appreciate in the light of what I've been listening to with your larger plans, it seems like a very small item, but it's important to us. I'm Kurt Wassenaar. I'm an architect, and I'm one of the owners of the triangle of land that sits at the bottom from Hydraulic Road kind of over to where Holiday Drive does its little twist there. And we've been following this for a long time. We have, it's about a little over 4 acre parcel.
Can you design around there? So we have
sure, I'm sorry. Yeah, so our property is all of this.
Okay.
Right there.
All right.
And the parcel is broken into 2 pieces. Right now there is what was, I think, an artifact of a right-of-way at the end, but this was released long ago, I think in the 1970s sometime. So there's no current right-of-way along this section at all. This is actually I think the walking trail. And in looking at all of the development plans that had come out of the study, the earlier ones, as you know, were bringing the Hillsdale extension through and connecting here. There was another earlier version that brought it through there. But in looking at all of those, none of those really dealt with this chunk of hydraulic road in the front. And in the current plan that Mr. Bowles was gracious enough to share with me, there is a ramp proposed that might do something like that, or cut across and connect those up. We know that there's a problem with Holiday Drive as it intersects 29, and we're excited about the ability to fix that. But it leaves us in a very weird scenario in that we're in the process of looking at development options for this triangle. We've also been working with Chris Jensick about dedicating this end of the property to the Rivanna Trail section. But my partners did not really want to go too far down that road until we had some sense of where we were going to land with all of this. So we have a number of problems that have merged. One is that we're really betwixt and between about what we can do with our property because of the uncertainty surrounding, how this might happen. We have an ongoing problem that we've been working with the city with respect to people parking along this edge. And you may or may not know, but they park big construction trailers and everything in the world in front of the building, and we'd like to resolve that if we could. We had asked the city to consider letting us vacate part of this or whatever was appropriate, and appropriately the city said, no, we really don't want to talk about that at all until the MPO has had a chance to get its study done and look at where we are. So that's kind of the quick background. we have no interest in building on any of the property that we would be looking at. We have no interest in any way causing a problem for the long-term development, but we'd like to forestall being in Neverland for the next however many years it takes to figure this out, so that we can at least try to have some rational thought about what we can do with our property. It appears that Holiday Drive would not be directly part of any part of the Hillsdale extension, although I realize that that's not completely clear. You may also realize that there's a big ditch right along this edge, so there's a significant grade shift there, and it was pretty clear to me in looking at it that if there were a ramp that was going to go from Hydraulic to Emmett or cut through this way, it would be on the bypass side, not particularly following the hydraulic road part. As such, we wanted to see if we could have a quick dialogue or sense from the MPO relative to a way to perhaps respond to this on our side. And what we're essentially asking is a blessing, I guess, from you to the city to allow us to enter into an agreement with the city in which we would ask the city to close the street or even better, to allow us to vacate this, but with an understanding by contract that at such time as that the city needed or the county needed as part of the transportation plan, we would be glad to return any parts of the easement that they needed and effectively have no impact on any future plans to develop the Hillsdale extension that might occur at this point. And so that's what we're trying to do, and just wanted to see if there were any openings to have a dialogue with you all about what we might do going forward so that we could try to resolve this a little bit better than we are. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have as well.
So does Holiday Drive just end right there?
Yeah, it goes around the corner. It's a very weird thing. I don't know what they were thinking about, but it goes right to there, and there's a property line right at the end of our property. This was originally in the late 60s and 70s an easement that went through here.
Right now it's just a sidewalk.
Right, literally right there. And that easement was released. So this property is all part of our property now.
And what happens when it stops?
It just
if
gets
I've ever driven.
The pavement just ends. That's it.
But is there signage?
Yeah,
No. There's usually a big pile of construction trucks left over from somebody's highway project sitting there, along with real estate companies and everybody else.
Those are also little curiosities.
Yes, it's one of those weird little things. You look at it and you kind of go, I have no idea what they were thinking about, because it's sort of the road to nowhere. And it really isn't going to happen. It almost can't be part of anything beyond a certain point. So anyway.
So I'm bewildered. Where do these trucks come from, and do they go and come on a daily basis, or they just
No,
park
they
there for
park them
weeks
there
at a
for
time?
months.
And you can have them towed away.
We try, but you know, the Charlottesville police are kind of sick of listening to us about this.
Okay.
So
So
you know, it's not designated. It's not
get this closed off.
anything. Or even if it could be closed off or whatever, we'd like to try to resolve it. It's also the only reasonably good access that we have to this back parcel. So we're obviously very concerned about what happens to that.
What's all the commercial that's above it?
This is Vepco, right? And originally, Corin Capshaw, many years ago when we bought the property, was trying to connect this together to put it into a big Home Depot or something, and that project fell apart. And we picked up, there's actually a stream that runs through here underground and some other things, so.
Well, I know we don't wanna jeopardize our smart scale improvements.
And we don't wanna do any, I would just reassure you, we don't wanna do anything at all that would in any way adversely affect the MPO's planning or whatever, but as you know, this could go on for a very long time by the time it's planned and designed and funded and anybody gets ready to build anything. Meanwhile, we're sort of sitting in la-la land here trying to figure out what we can do or what might be possible, so.
And there are lots of users and vehicles that come to your building.
Yes.
So having a card gate, like they have it.
Or even just being able to say
you have to
this
give
is.
them all cards, but that's one option,
Yeah,
that the
I
city
mean,
could just put that up.
Even being able to
and
put a.
let you in now.
Right, even being able to just put a curb there and say this is a private parking area or it's a closed road or anything,
Yeah, because it doesn't connect to anything, and
No.
I don't see a problem why.
But it's a public safety nightmare if you're having trucks in the way and your
It
engines
is.
can't
It
get there,
is.
that's ridiculous.
Where would you want it, the vacation to begin?
Well, yeah, far corner.
Well, all of the proposed Hillsdale extension plans, and I realize that these may be changing and very much in the future, the most invasive ones sort of try to do this. In the temporary scenario, we'd actually like to sort of end this with a T interchange or something that would be a VDOT approved corner at that point and close it off there. With the understanding that as the design comes back for a future road, it may well take, all of this chunk or whatever. The other issue for us is if this is closed off, we now have no access to our building except a sort of hilly little funny drive that goes to this real parking lot. So it's pretty clear that there would need to be some consideration for us and so forth for ourselves.
So in a sense though, you need that street eventually.
We do, and what we'd really like to do is to have it and kind of make it a win-win for us and the city, where the city would get the Rivanna Trail, we'd be able to resolve all of this to some reasonable level. We'd be able to clean this up so it's not a problem anymore, and we'd be able to provide the city with a absolutely guaranteed mechanism to acquire whatever easements it might need in the future, whenever that would happen, to conduct whatever they need to do on that edge. So. And, I don't know if we need more than just a blessing from the MPO to go back to the city. We've talked to Heather and the planners, and they said, well, there's really no scenario that we would even talk to you until we get a blessing of some sort or a go-ahead nod or something from you all, so.
I would
have
like
enough
to hear the
information.
city's take on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There could be some, it sounds appealing, but I don't know what the.
But it almost sounds like that you're asking to close the street, but you need that street open for the development. And we don't wanna give up public easement in the area that we already own that we're gonna need eventually for the Hillsdale extension.
I mean, depending on the configuration, we're basically gonna have two ramps that go through that whole section of property right there. One in and one out. So, we don't even know if it's gonna fit in what's there now.
Yeah.
Without,
It's entirely, if you look at the drawings, it's entirely possible that it would take part of this edge, and the plans show that, and that's fine, we understand that.
what in the concept plans that they've got as part of the things, it looks like the width extends all the way from the building itself, almost to the parking lot on the other side.
The last plan that you showed,
Which is
agenda item 4C, the update, that drawing that was included. It's really, and if you look at the topography of what's going on here, it doesn't really show it well, but there's enough space on this edge of the 250 bypass to add even one or two lanes, probably just one as a decel piece that comes in like that. And this chunk of Holiday Drive really doesn't get affected at all. It's sort of an artifact that would be left over.
Yeah, but it's basically from your building to the parking lot at Red Roof Inn, all that whole area section through there might be affected.
Yeah. We understand that,
The whole thing, even the property that's not within the road, that's not part of the road, it could be that.
We understand that as well.
All that grass area in front, and we don't know necessarily until we get into the design features what the impacts are gonna be. And if there is an elevation change, which there is, we're gonna have to take that into account when we're building those approaches to make sure that we can make that work.
Which is exactly why we were proposing that we would agree in advance to give back whatever easement the final design engineering drawings showed was needed. But at least we would have some certainty about what was gonna transpire down the road.
And then connection, we don't normally have accesses directly to a ramp for would be another
You'd have to have a rear entrance.
So that the entrance will probably have to be located to the rear of the site anyway.
Yeah, they were showing it sort of doing this at that end, and the other one sort of doing this in the drawing that we have.
Yeah. I mean, but when you're, if that's a 2-lane road, when talking about across shoulders, it's probably gonna be 30 or 40 foot across at least, which is significantly more than what's out there now.
I mean, even 30, if you put 30 or 40 feet on the edge of the 250 bypass, which would be likely, you're only really coming to that point.
Along 250, it may not be significant, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying the area.
You're absolutely correct at that point that there would be some interviews. And we understand that. We're not asking you to forego anything with respect to that part of it. What we would like to do is have an interim scenario that allows us to manage and understand what we have and what we can do with that chunk in the short term, which may be, 2, 3, 4, 5 years or more.
And then beyond the understanding what will happen, you have control over that parking situation, or you could just tow people at your own, not have to call other people.
Exactly, we would be able to remove the maintenance of it and management of it from the city.
I think we could just figure out a way to make it so that there's no parking on that street.
Make it a private use or something.
As opposed to dealing with giving up public right of way, that we still need to understand ourselves what the ultimate footprint of the extension is gonna be.
When did you all buy the property?
We've owned it about 7 years now.
I
Since World Strikes.
I just would feel a need for some take from the city, because if you all purchased the property knowing that this was a situation and there could be complexities here. I mean, it sounds very, I just feel like there's one more step where we should hear something.
There's a big information gap that's existing right now.
They're very aligned, but this is the first time that an individual parcel has been brought before us for discussions if we're planning.
I can't make a decision.
The jeopardy is huge as far as we've got $18 million sitting in a pot here that we may lose the entire thing if we don't have the right land here.
Right.
So.
Along with staff.
I have a lot more to learn before I can.
And I don't know I really don't know what the right solution is. It may just be if the city would be willing to close the street and let us use it or have it closed or or something.
That to me is something that we make a request.
Well, that's all I do. Our responsibility here as MPOs, if the city sent them to us, then we just have to say, well.
This isn't our purview.
Then that goes back to the city.
Our concern is a regional network.
Then that had to be directed to the right place, but I mean, it's not like we'd be waiting again for something.
Is Tony here?
We had a relatively lengthy discussion with staff, and at the end of the day, they threw their hands in the air and said, well, you really have to go to the MPO and have the study finished and tell us what the MPO will do, and then we'll know.
Well, our city councilors, would one of you care to make a motion about sending this back to yourselves and to city staff to solve this, because we don't feel it's our responsibility.
This is Heather Newmeyer and Missy Freezy.
Anybody else?
Missy and Heather. But they didn't know how to deal with the transportation study and the larger plan.
Well, it may not be timely to be solved right now. That's the issue that you guys are gonna have to figure out.
I do think from
staff should be coming to us requesting the council for direction or extra policy, drafting that policy for us to approve. This is really, it didn't even come before council.
Yeah, or the city.
It didn't come before the planning commission.
It feels like this should have been escalated to the DS director or the city manager.
Well, I apologize.
You didn't do it. This is not your fault. It's not your fault.
Well, I mean, this should not
This
have
doesn't
come
feel,
before.
it doesn't feel right, we're not.
I
I appreciate your perspective, but we should, so we'll take this back.
Yeah.
So Chip, can you just send us everything here and then
Definitely.
we'll escalate it to our body and we'll figure out.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your
We'll try and do
consideration.
it expeditiously.
Anything that we can help us with would be very greatly appreciated, so thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so I think that was the last item added to the agenda. Were there others that people have not brought up yet? And then if not, we'll move on to the next meeting, May 23rd at the airport.
I do just have a question. Because I had gotten an email from a member of CTAC. I had gotten an email from a member of CTAC. I can't remember the person's name, but that they had been requesting a meeting to discuss the drop in ridership for our transit systems. And they never got follow-up with data. I'll just forward that to you.
Okay.
RTP. Right, I don't know whether it came to me but it was a CTAC member, it was MPO. Correct? But they had been asking for ridership data from John and Kat, and they never got it. And that they didn't understand why CTAC wasn't involved in those discussions. Okay, so.
Yeah, I'm really confused because we provide the monthly ridership report for Kat and John
And they had
to
seen the
CTAC.
drop and they were concerned, this person was concerned about the drop.
Well, they could.
This is what Councilor Hill sent us, Vice Mayor Hill sent us.
And we have had discussions in CTAC, with the members of CTAC on the reporting data available. And one of the things that we've pointed out, which has been discussed here and at RTP, is this is the first time that we've had this data available to us.
Okay.
And making assumptions from 3 months of data is never great. And that if there are specific questions for CAT, there is the CAT Advisory Board that does play that citizen interactive role, and that we have CAT representation on both Policy Board and the Technical Committee, and those meetings are always open for members of the public, and that we are currently working to get as per the CTAC bylaws, have a CTAC representative that attends both the Policy Board and the MPO Technical Committee Board on a regular basis.
Good. That will help them all be part of
If
the
you
process.
get that
But
to
I'll just
us,
forward that to
please,
you.
so we can, yes.
And
Because it was directed to you and it was directed to the mayor and vice mayor, city's mayor and vice mayor. And then they directed it to me and Mike as the MPO reps.
Okay.
So, and they were members of,
Learning process, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be glad to,
Okay.
and if it's something, I mean, we'll work with Karen and John and those, I'm sure.
And it was a county resident, which is to add further complexity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I would tell
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do.
The presentation at the CTAC meeting would probably help to get more.
Well,
Maybe you've already done
let me
that.
say, kind of along those lines with under the other is just to remind everybody, hopefully you got your invitations, May 31st, at 6 o'clock at City Space. There we go. The basics of why transit. This is the Jarrett Walker consultants that will be presenting. And I know for the elected officials, you very likely, well, I know that you were also invited to a Charlottesville Area Alliance drop-in, which will be held here just prior to that. So though they overlap the end of one over the other, the first is just a drop-in, so you won't have to miss.
Great.
Yeah,
All right. Fantastic, thank you, that's great. Any other additional matters from the public who are still remaining at the end of our meeting? All right, other assignments or homework before we meet again?
June 14th, 5:30 to 7:30, Water Street Center, LRTP, public open house. Full court press is occurring in terms of outreach for this, Facebook, social media, online, Seaville Weekly, print advertisement, on the website, information to be forthcoming.
Okay, great.
CTAC has been notified and engaged on this. And then item 9, the transit update that was presented at the RTP, as always, is included in the packet.
Right.
there is an item on the agenda, I just bring it up. And it's opportunity if there are comments or concerns.
Madam Chair, I don't need the transit update, but I had a couple questions regarding the report. If I can throw out there, I don't need answers tonight, I can give it some other point. There seemed to be in the report a big piece of wanting to compare to the prior year's month. And I just don't get why that's an important point. So I was hoping somebody could explain to me why comparing February to last February for ridership is an important reporting point. Does anybody?
See,
I mean, if I'm.
near-term trends.
But I mean, if you're doing trends and it's moving, I don't know the month to month. It seemed to be such a big, you get total ridership, you get a month versus the prior month. And I get that. I guess, are you looking at it from a sales perspective or sales up year over year kind of thing? Or it just seems to be an interesting point that is there. And I was going, this is supposed to be important, and I couldn't figure out in my head why this was an important data point for me to be looking at. So I didn't know if that was an industry thing, and if there was some
That's
extra.
something we've done. I've been in this industry for nearly 40 years. We also compare the prior year. Month of this year, month of last year, so we can tie it all back and see the trends over time. I've been sending out reports that way for, I've been in this industry for over 40 years and been sending out reports that way for over 20. Something that.
But there may be a different percentage.
No, I agree, it doesn't, you know.
But it doesn't really tell us anything, so there you go.
I don't know the trend system.
Why that's on this. I don't know why it matters, and I don't want to be, just have to ask the question and go, okay, unless we have the idiot at the table.
Yeah, so it is an industry standard, but I agree with you. I was looking at some of the numbers too, and I'm like, it could be a snowstorm that just, want to ride. You go, without all the information, you really.
And I can't imagine that looking at ridership, increase or decrease alone a month to another month, in and of itself, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do for that. And down ridership might not be a bad thing, the larger picture of what we're trying to do in the bigger scheme of things. So that was just a question I had. The other question I had was about, John provided information that had youth, elderly, and a breakdown of some demographics for their ridership. And I was curious if Cat provided that same level.
We don't have that level because they're fixed route, we can't provide that level. They're, with George, you call in and you schedule.
Right.
They have demographic information available in their database because they have a list of clients. They know who's calling. They know that John Smith rides Monday, Wednesday, Friday every week. And they know that he's 70 years old, so he's elderly.
So how would this?
I can't do that because my riders get on, they throw $1 in the fare box, and I don't know if they're 16. Obviously, I know the difference between a 16 and a 70-year-old. But I don't know if you're 16 and a youth or 21 and an adult. It's fixed route.
But I do think you can get at that data because your routes are going through census tracts.
We can by that, but
well, and that's
our data comes out of the fare box and we don't get it.
No, I understand that, but I think what you're getting at is point well taken. We do want to understand our demographics. And when Jacob last time I guess it was the RTP, it was the MPO, I can't remember, but there was the recommendation about changing routes and then discontinuing routes, and I raised a very impassioned concern about getting rid of the routes on Cherry Avenue and 10th Street, which are historic African American neighborhoods, would just be not acceptable at this point in time because we know that that is a very, very transit dependent population. And so we know that because of the census tract data. It's not because of the ridership counts.
Pay hours and things like that.
Right, so there's ways for us to get at that information, but you're right, you're a fixed route. We don't get that data based on use.
We don't dive that deeply into it.
Does Cat don't you do passes or long-term things? Could you, even on a volunteer basis, get people to buy, do they do that in Cat?
They buy passes, but they don't put personal information in the pass database.
So you couldn't voluntarily ask for demographic information to change some sort of issue?
Wouldn't necessarily be
Look, my bigger point here is we always are looking at transit. Transit is an incredibly important issue. But the data that's presented in this report, I don't know what to do with. And unless we get a different level of data, then I don't know how to go, well, this is working or not working. So when I look at the routes that go through my particular district in Albemarle, you know, I could probably back into it through the who's getting on at what times and go, well, that's probably a person going to work, that's probably a person going to the senior center. You could back into it somehow. And I don't, you know, if these are the reports that keep coming and doesn't try to go further than that, then I don't know what we're supposed to do with this. And again, I'm not being critical. I want somebody to tell me what to do with this.
Well, and I think
and I
the
don't think we know
RTP
yet,
discussions
actually.
are really getting into that, because we do need policy analysis. We need analysis of what we've got so we can create better policy. And that, again, we just started the RTP.
And I would say your comments are exactly what we want to produce from this, because we've been doing this only for less than a year.
3 of these.
It's 3 meetings.
3 meetings. And we started using, as Karen and John said, industry standards. We took other transit agencies and their reporting data, and we just mimicked it and created the forms of our own. But we want to massage this to fit what we need. And so any comments, suggestions of what can we do? Now, we also have to work with the service providers of there's certain data that's not being collected now that may be very difficult to collect or costly. So we have to weigh it all. But if we can hear from everybody what we, you know, I see what you're giving me, but what I need is this. We can try to figure out how to do that.
It might not be on CAT to necessarily do it, but I mean, I'm hearing people with these bike things where they're punching in their apps, and we're tracking bikers where they're going. Well, nobody's punching in with them, it's all volunteer. And that's good data, so you could probably do a similar thing.
Well, and we just put in bike counters as well, which the drop in one of the free trolley routes was stark for me. And when Julia Monteith was here, she was talking about that also. And the month-to-month thing was interesting because they had just introduced their bike share. So if they're dropping ridership, it could possibly be because people really are using bikes. And we need to get at that. We need to do the analysis to figure that out.
Because you'd be okay with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I really have to give a plug to VDOT, because it's been beneficial, but I don't even think we've scratched the surface yet. I mean, they've been one of the, in my understanding, the first states to contract with a company called Streetlights that collects the data from your phones.
Okay.
It's the big data analytics.
Yes, and so they're able to look at traffic counts, you know, based on that. Well, it's becoming more and more precise that you can start to look at, I mean, bus service is a little bit different, but you can start to look at bike and pedestrian data.
Right.
Because you can pull that out. They're not doing 75 miles per hour on their bicycle. And so, yeah, we are, hopefully.
Well,
yeah, but
Jeez.
we have access
Not even
because of
in my dreams.
VDOT's contract for that data, and it's growing and growing, and I see for the future that's going to give us information that we can really do some neat things with.
I'm sorry, but
It's not there yet.
All I would ask
yes.
is maybe at a future meeting, I hate for people to be putting reports together, and then as the person sitting here don't know what to do with that report. And if there's a way to get a different level of report and the energy could go into that versus some of this other data, then I would be for that. And if that means having a 15-minute conversation or something here at the MPO, I would love to throw that out there as something.
And I think the transit partnership at their upcoming meetings should be talking about these
And we
things as
are.
well. So
we're talking about
that will be what comes back.
Especially because the 3 organizations, UTS, John, and CAT, all report everything differently. And that is the challenge for the TJPDC to come up with a consistent reporting mechanism and format, even right down to looking at budgets the same way. Because it's hard to compare apples with apples.
Well, and respects the point about, if it's a call list and you know where they're calling from versus somebody just popping on.
Right.
You gotta, I just would hope that we could use it a little bit to, if the energy's going into a report, let's make it a report that works for us as opposed to one that's just.
And I'd like to see, and this has come up many times at the RTP, is that we need to be seeing the map and the data, and we need to see correlations. And if it does mean we need to be looking at census tract data for demographics in this meantime with Kat, but then we also have the data with John, then we're getting a fuller picture. But that's the kind of thing we have been talking about at the RTP.
And I perhaps finish this, John, Karen, Brad, myself just got back from a meeting in Richmond on transit where the efficiency of systems is becoming more and more important to your funding. So being able to show that our assets are being used efficiently as possible with the ridership is going to really influence the available funding for our systems. So being able to use the data to fine tune our routes is going to be crucial.
But, and I guess my issue last time we spoke was with the presentation that Jacob had made. Not only were we looking at the ridership and the efficiencies, but routes are being changed with new destinations that could very well increase ridership. So you can't we had to keep variables fixed in order to, and that's the thing that I'm concerned about, that if we're changing a destination, but we're abandoning a route, before you change that destination, you don't know whether that destination change would have increased ridership of that route, because it suddenly became more desirable. And so that's all I was just saying. It's extremely sensitive when it's dealing with class and race.
Access to jobs and all those things.
Yeah, access to jobs, yeah, if you're changing the destination so it's much more fruitful in that regard, you're gonna get more people using it.
Thank you. Good. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up.
That's good.
Very helpful.
Thank you, I'm saying.
All of us are equally bewildered, I will say. Thank you.
I agree with any adjournment.
All right. I think we've worn ourselves out, actually, so I
Very
think
good.
we can
Thank you.
just
Full
adjourn it
agenda.
now. Thank you, it was great, good meeting, thank you all very much for your staff time.
July will be busy too, and that will be at the airport.
Yes, we are we're coordinating with the folks at CHO, and they're very excited to host us there.
Good.
A note will be that in early discussions, they indicated it will be on the secure side of the airport.
Yeah.
So government issued photo identification will be required, and there'll be more information coming about all of that as we coordinate with the
Hopefully they'll send us short-term parking passes.
CHO Airport
At the
next
lot right
meeting.
next to the building. So
Bring your
zoom
driver's
up there.
license.
Don't like,